The attempted assassination on President Donald Trump serves as powerful evidence that we are indeed in a spiritual war. And when you watch this video, you'll get a picture of how serious this war is. All right, folks, let's get into this one. I have to say, over the last week and a half, we have seen so many insane things happening in front of our eyes. And the issue that we're going to talk about is undoubtedly no exception. But I want to say this. We are in a spiritual war, and perhaps the most significant variable that exists within that spiritual war centers around the fact that most people don't even know the war exists. And the reality of it is, the very moment we open our eyes to recognize what's actually going on, it's going to change how we fight it. And undoubtedly, we will find ourselves in the middle of a whole bunch of victory because the Bible talks to us about these very things. So we're going to get into a Bible passage that I think is really important. I'm going to read it to you near the end of the video. I think it's significant. I want you to pay attention to it because it's going to be a key that's going to unlock how to find the victory through this time and how to navigate through it. But I want to focus in on an article that Victor Davis Hanson wrote. And I want to say this because in this article, I want to make myself clear. He's right. So much of the stuff that he says is based on some very astute observations, but what is not being discussed here is what drives the very things that he's actually observing. Because what he's actually observing is remarkable, yet it is tied to something that is very spiritual. So what he does here is he talks about the sickness on the left and the discussion that relates to their infatuation with the idea of wanting to see President Trump basically perish. And it's very heavy, some of the stuff that he actually says. He starts off his article in a very powerful way. And I want to say this, it's a little wordy, but I think it's important to kind of take it in and listen to what he says here. This is what he says. He starts off by saying, if we were leftists and we were to use leftist tropes to editorialize the recent attempt on Trump's life, then we would frame the assassination attempt in the following way. We have witnessed for years blatant exceptions to the once common custom that we don't normalize the imagined killing of any president or presidential candidate and thus lower the bar of violence. Then he goes on to point this out. He says, but the left constantly makes Trump an exception. And boy, is he right. Look what he goes on to say. He says, now it is as if the imagined killing of Trump has been mainstream and become acceptable in a way inconceivable of other presidents. He points this out. He says, do we remember the rodeo clown who merely wore an Obama mask during a bull riding contest and was punished by being permanently banned by the Missouri State Fair authorities? So since at least 2016, there have been a parlor game among leftist celebrities and entertainers joking, and of course, we would hope that it was them joking, dreaming, imagining, and just talking about the various graphic ways they would like to assassinate or seriously injure Trump. Look at the list that they give. Robert De Niro says, by slugging his face. Kathy Griffin, Marilyn Manson, by decapitation, right? Shakespeare in the Park talks about stabbing. The Clubbing, Mickey Rourke talks about this. By shooting, Snoop Dogg, of course. And if you remember, he actually does this weird, twisted video. And then, of course, Anthony Bourdain talks about dreaming poisoning him, which, by the way, Anthony Bourdain isn't even around anymore. That's a very sad story. George Lopez talks about bounty killing him. I mean, think about that, folks. Larry Wilmore says by suffocating. How about Madonna by blowing him up? I mean, think about the craziness that these people are saying. Rosie O'Donnell throwing him over a cliff. Johnny Depp killing him, just literally generic killing him. Look at Reid Hoffman. Yeah, I wish I had made him an actual martyr. I mean, think about this, folks. Like, imagine if anybody had said that about any other person other than Trump. All of these phrases are completely unacceptable, yet they continue to use phrases like this. Look at this astute paragraph, and it's definitely sarcasm, but look what he says. He says, or should we deplore the use of telescopic scope imagery, given that the left blames Sarah Palin for once using bullseye spots on an election map of opposition congressional districts, claiming that such usage had incited the mass shooting by Jared Lee Loughner? Yes, you remember that, folks? You remember when that whole thing happened and they blamed her for that mass shooting? Look what he points out. He says, yet recently, the president of the United States, Joe Biden, was a little bit more graphic and a lot more literal. In a widely reported call to hundreds of donors last week, Biden boasted, here's his quote, "I have one job, and that is to beat Donald Trump. I'm absolutely certain I'm the best person to be able to do that, so we're done talking about the debate. It's time to put Trump in a bullseye." Folks, he said that before the assassination attempt. And by the way, Lester Hall decided to push him on the issue and question him, and look at what he says. Let me show you the video. I want you to watch this.
Well, let's talk about the conversation this has started, and it's really about language, what we say out loud and the consequences of those. You called your opponent an existential threat on a call a week ago. You said it's time to put Trump in the bullseye. There's some dispute about the context, but I think you appreciate that.
I didn't say crosshairs. I was talking about focus on. Look, the truth of the matter was, what I guess I was talking about at the time was, there was very little focus on Trump's agenda.
Yeah, the term was bullseye.
It was a mistake to use the word. I didn't say crosshairs. I meant bullseye. I meant focus on him. Focus on what he's doing. Focus on his policies. Focus on the number of lies he told in the debate. Focus. I mean, there's a whole range of things that, look, I'm not the guy that said, I want to be a dictator on day one. I'm not the guy that refused to accept the outcome of the election. I'm not the guy who said that won't accept the outcome of this election automatically. You can't only love your country when you win. And so the focus was on what he's saying, and I mean, the idea.
But have you taken a step back and done a little soul searching on things that you may have said that could incite people who are not balanced?
Well, I don't think, look, how do you talk about the threat to democracy, which is real, when a president says things like he says? Do you just not say anything because it may incite somebody? Look, I have not engaged in that rhetoric. Now, my opponent is engaged in that rhetoric. He talks about there'll be a bloodbath if he loses, talking about how he's going to forgive all the, actually, I guess, suspend the sentences of all those who were arrested and sentenced to go to jail because of what happened in the Capitol. I'm not out there making fun of, like, remember the picture of Donald Trump when Nancy Pelosi's husband was hit with a hammer, joking about it?
Boy, his mischaracterization of all of that is unbelievable. How about we find a video where he says this, and this one will blow your mind. But you remember that video where he said, if we were in high school, I'd take him behind the gym and beat the literal hell out of him? You remember when he said that? Those are his words, folks. Those are not my words. Those are his words. We'll show you the video.
Press always asks me, don't I wish I were debating him? No, I wish we were in high school. I could take him behind the gym. That's what I wish. When a guy who ended up becoming our national leader said, I can grab a woman anywhere and she likes it, and then said, I didn't make a mistake, but they asked me, would I like to debate this gentleman? And I said, no. I said, if we were in high school, I'd take him behind the gym and beat the hell out of him. I shouldn't have said that. But then I was told that's just locker room talk. Well, I've been in a lot of locker rooms my whole life, a pretty damn good athlete. Any guy who talked that way was usually the fattest, ugliest SOB in the room. For real. You guys are athletes. You know what I'm talking about.
In other words, the president of the United States is saying that he wishes he could beat a former president. Tell me, does that make any sense in anybody's world? It's a complete double standard. It's a complete double standard. How about the fact that he denied Secret Service protection for one of his political opponents? Do we need to get into that? Look at this astute observation that Victor makes in his article. He says, then there is the question of the Secret Service and one's political opponents. Given the tragic history of the Kennedys, why in the world did Biden administration not insist that third-party candidate Robert Kennedy Jr. be accorded Secret Service protection? Think about that. Why? Because his candidacy is very clearly a disadvantage to Biden. But let me give you the bigger reason. Let me give you the bigger answer. The bigger answer is this is spiritual. Look at this picture. Do you remember this? Do you remember the recent cover of the New Republic? You remember what they did to that? Do you remember what they did to President Trump? How they made him look like Hitler? Here's a picture of that. It's absolutely crazy that they would associate him with one of the most violent mass murderers in world history. But why do they do this? I'll tell you why they do this. They do it because, and it's really important, they do it because this is a spiritual battle. They do it because the god of this world, the devil, is the father of lies, and he loves to deceive, and he loves to misguide, and he loves to pull people away in contexts that they don't even know they're being pulled away in. The battle that we are fighting is spiritual, and so much of the rhetoric that we are seeing, so much of the actions that are being taken, so much of the evil that we are looking at is a direct result of things that are happening in the invisible realm. And I think it's really important that we understand and take heed to the fact that there is such a realm, that realm exists, and we need to be aware of the responsibility that we have to engage in it. It's super critical. Look at what Ephesians chapter 6 tells us. He says this in verse 12. He says, "For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. Wherefore, take unto you" what? "The whole armor of God, that you may be able to withstand in the evil day, and having done all to stand." Folks, he's saying it. He's saying this is not a physical battle. This is not about one person saying this and another person saying that. This is not about this person getting hit over here or that bullet flying over there. Everything that surrounds this is based on a realm that we cannot see. We can feel it. We can definitely determine and understand the effects of it, but undoubtedly we can't see it. But that does not mean that we should not be paying attention to it. Simply because we can't see it doesn't mean that it's not real. Think about it. People tell me this stuff all the time. Well, I can't see it. I won't believe it. Well, that's an ignorant and foolish statement to make. Why? Because if you are watching this video, then you have to believe in electricity, because you need electricity to actually turn these things on. But guess what? You've never seen it before. You've never seen electricity. You've only seen the effects of it. Well, I've seen lightning. No, lightning is the effect of something that you cannot physically see with your eyes. So just because you can't see something does not mean that it is not there. Folks, this is such a powerful and important principle for us to grasp, because what happens for us, especially as believers, is we tend to ignore the spiritual realm, which is why we get our butts kicked by it. And the world, we certainly can't expect the world to understand this, because the world doesn't even operate in that realm, at least not with their full awareness of what's going on. They're all over that realm. They're totally in that realm, but they don't know what they're doing. They have no idea that they are participating in a way that's destroying their lives and the lives of their family and the lives of their children and the lives of the people around them, because they don't understand that they are in an invisible war and they have no tools to engage in that war. And instead of seeking to engage in that war with the right tools that God has given them, they continue to propagate the nonsense because of the derivatives that come from that war, because they choose to pretend as though it's not there, because they don't know God. They don't have the Spirit of God living inside of them, and they have no discernment. People come to me about last week and say, well, James, what's the big deal about some of the people that spoke at the Republican National Committee? So that girl that spoke, Amber Rose, she's on OnlyFans and does all this other stuff. But what's that have to do with the fact that she said something that was really helpful for people to hear? Because the battle is spiritual. You don't understand the effects of what happens when you allow yourself to be given to that kind of stuff. I mean, at the end of the first day, they had somebody do a chant to the false god, right? To a God is not the true God, yet they allow somebody to get up there and say this is to the true God. This is the kind of nonsense, folks, that we are dealing with. This is the kind of ridiculousness. This is the kind of ungodliness that we begin to see manifest. I'll show you the video of that chant. Watch it. It's unbelievable. It's beyond shocking. Watch this.
तुम्हारी गत मित तुम ही जानी नानक दास सदा कुर्बानी. Dear Waheguru, our one true God.
Waheguru, our one true God. Last I checked, The only true God is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Look what she goes on to say.
We thank you for creating America as a unique haven on this earth where all people are free to worship according to their faith. We seek your blessings and guidance for our beloved country.
We thank you for creating America. God did that. The true and living God, not some false demonic God that's being worshiped at the Republican National Committee convention. The same Republican National Committee that has loosened up their language with respect to the preservation of marriage, sacred marriage that God has put together. The fact that they have thrown out all kinds of terminology that condemns abortion. All of this is spiritual, folks. All of this is spiritual. In a place where you would expect to see the apex of conservatism. Well, I got news for you. Conservatism is demonic if it does not have anything to do with Jesus. If Jesus is not coupled with conservatism, conservatism is garbage. It doesn't mean anything at all. That's why he tells us to put on the whole armor of God, that we might be able to utilize the tools that God has given us to engage in that spiritual warfare. Look at the tools that he gives us. Obviously, he's using military terms, but look at the actual tools. Truth, righteousness. This is in Ephesians chapter 6:14. The gospel of peace, faith, being able to avoid or quench the fiery darts of the enemy because of that faith. Salvation, the word of God, prayer, supplication in the Spirit. We don't use these tools. And because we don't use these tools, we continue to be given to the lies and to the nonsense that we are watching right now happening in the world around us. Folks, I'll say this one more time. We are in a spiritual war, and it's time to engage using the tools of our warfare, the weapons of our warfare. God saved the life of Donald Trump. And I believe he saved the life of Donald Trump for a very specific purpose. It's time that we engage in praying that that purpose would come to pass instead of a deeper dive into paganism. It's that simple. A lot is on the line. Let's fight the good fight, you guys. The battle is real. It's spiritual. God bless you.